whatever.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer, and with me is my co-host, Deb. I'm calling you co-host now.
Okay,
Deb,
fine.
co-host slash guest, Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. And today's topic, because we just sort of come across things in the horse world,
I do.
and
I do.
today's topic is called this whole back saddle fitting thing. We didn't know what else to call it, but it's basically what a lot of us run into in the struggle to find a good fitting saddle for our hard to fit horse, or dealing with different saddle issues like the flocking squishing down on one side, or the saddle always slipping to one
Mm,
side, getting a sticky saddle pad, or getting a girth that can tighten up a little bit more, or a non-slip girth. So saddle slippage and asymmetry in our saddle is directly
mm.
related to how the horse uses its back. Even a saddle that keeps gravitating
Can you
too
say
far
that
back.
again?
Can I say what again?
Just say that again, the relationship with the saddle and the back.
Ah, so the saddle slipping, or sort of wearing the saddle down asymmetrically, those
Mm.
go hand in hand with spinal functions and how our horse uses the back. And also the saddle
Right.
that always slips backwards. So,
Ah,
like the saddle that ends up way behind the shoulder and the girth keeps slipping backwards out of the heart girth, that again is a direct result of how the horse is using the back.
that
And
is so important to let people know that when they see the saddle slip to one side, it's a direct relationship to what is going on with the horse's back.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, no ifs, ands, or
Yeah.
buts about
That
it.
is so important for people to realize that.
Because it happens to everybody.
Uh-huh.
And most people's answer is to get a sticky saddle pad, or get a
Mhm.
stickier girth, or tighten up the cinch and girth more, or maybe the saddle doesn't fit, get the saddle fitter out. Maybe flock the saddle. If it's an English saddle, flock the panels asymmetrically to keep the saddle from slipping.
Wow.
And there's all kinds of remedies that we come up with, but it really is the saddle slipping side to side is a direct result of how our horse is functioning regarding alignment and rotation and lateral bending of the spine. And then the saddle slipping backwards, like that happened on one of my horses for a long time. And I couldn't figure out, when I put the saddle on the back, the girth should always sort of cinch up or tighten up right behind the horse's elbow, the front leg. And it's
Right.
the narrowest part of the chest called the heart girth. And that's where the girth goes, the heart girth. And I try to get it snug without making it too tight when I first put the saddle on. And invariably, it would sort of slide out of the heart girth area and be farther back, and the whole saddle was farther back on the back.
Wow.
And I'd have to, undo the girth, replace the saddle, tighten it up again. And I basically would have to resaddle him in the time I went from the tacking up area to the
Yep.
riding area.
Yep. I've had that happen.
And again, that's a direct result of how the horse is using the spine and the back. So it's not really necessarily the saddle fit, or you don't have the right girth or the right pad. The forces that are generated by the use of the horse's back muscles and functions of the spine are a tremendous amount of force. And
Right.
that's going to cause the saddle to move.
That's
Especially
just so fascinating to me.
and so what was it you said that sort of took us down this track today? This whole back saddle fitting thing started
Okay.
because you've been reading up
I'm
on
me and my
saddle
geeky things.
information.
Yeah, this was at saddlefitting.us, and it said by definition, the saddle is a symmetric object. What was it? To sit on a healthy, well-muscled top line. And I thought,
Yeah.
what does that mean?
Well, the thing I love hearing from a saddle fitting website is the saddle should always be inherently symmetrical.
I like that. So what do you mean by symmetrical? Symmetrical, like the flocking should be even on both sides.
Always. The
Okay.
panels,
Okay.
so everything should be symmetrical. The middle of the saddle that spans the horse's bony part of the spine is the gullet, and there should be an equal amount of saddle on the left and right sides of that gullet. So whether
Of
we're
the saddle.
talking,
Okay.
right, so whether we're
Okay.
talking how it's cut or how it's padded or how it's shaped, the saddle itself should always be symmetrical. And I go, the best
Ah,
saddle we have is coming out of the saddle maker or the saddle factory, where all that engineering is, things are measured, things are made symmetrically in the factory,
okay.
hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And we're basically taking that symmetrical, even, equal saddle and putting it on our horse's back. Now
Okay.
we have the challenge because
Right.
depending on how the horse is using the back, that very symmetrical and well-fitted saddle can still shift, can still move because of the force coming from the horse's back, as well as the forces that we put
We
downward
put
into the saddle
exactly,
as a
yeah.
rider.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So the there's a direct relationship between the saddle being put somewhere and that the horse is putting it somewhere or the rider or whatever.
Right.
Because the saddle then, okay, yeah. The
Because what
saddle should
cracks
be
me up,
neutral.
well, the saddle is neutral. It does not
Okay,
have
thank
a
you.
mind of
It
its
doesn't,
own.
it's not like I'm going to sit over on the left today,
Yeah. It doesn't have a motor. It doesn't
right?
have a mind of its own.
Right?
So it cracks me up a little bit when people go, my saddle always goes to the left, or my saddle goes too far back. Like the saddle is doing that
Hmm.
independently of any other
With
factor.
upon its own thinking.
Right. And that's why we go, I need more sticky, grippy stuff so the saddle doesn't move
Oh,
because the saddle
interesting.
is moving. And I go, the saddle isn't doing anything. The saddle is succumbing to the forces that are generated by the horse's back use and by the rider's back use and
Okay.
balance. So the saddle is going wherever the horse and rider put the saddle,
Are
especially,
putting it.
yeah, especially if you have your sort of factory specs, well-made saddle that fits your horse reasonably well. So the second part of what you said, so the symmetrical part is really important to me. And I've gotten into arguments with saddle fitters about flocking saddles asymmetrically to help the rider. And I can't
Yeah,
work
I
with
hear
that.
this all the time. Oh, I had it refloxed to fit my horse. And then you look at it and it's totally lopsided. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, if you flip any saddle upside down and you look at the panels, they should be absolutely symmetrical left to right. That's what the horse's back is feeling. So if one panel is overflocked, which you can't do on a Western saddle, Western
Right,
saddles, they have to use different pads or shims for the same purpose, which I also
right,
don't do. But in an English saddle, the saddle fitter can add extra flocking to the left side or the right side,
right.
which it has the effect of helping the rider stay more symmetrical, but it's creating a constant force against the horse's back that disallows any correction. And it means the back is now locked into this
A dysfunction. Hmm.
asymmetrical pattern of use, right?
Right.
So on an evenly flocked saddle, if it keeps going to the left, that tells you you have a left-handed horse, which traces back to too much spinal rotation with the dorsal tips left, too much left lateral bending through the spine. So the horse is not straight internally, even if they look straight. And what that's going to do
Right.
is it's going to cause the back muscles on the left side of the spine to atrophy, pulling the
Mm.
saddle downward. And it's going to cause the back muscles on the right side of the spine to overwork and try to maintain stability. So that's going to be either the flocking that flattens out first, right? So if we flock the left side to bring it up to the height of the right side, you're still creating pressure for the same problem in the horse's back. So we're locking the horse into that habit of rotation and lateral bend internally. So even if they look straight, they're not straight.
That's
Just
the
like
same with people.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
They might look straight, but when I put hands on 'em, it's like, oh my goodness, we are so crooked on the inside.
And how do you know that? When you put
Um,
hands on, what do you feel? It tells
I
you
feel
that
the asymmetrical, the imbalance
in the
of
muscle use,
in the
especially.
muscle use. Yeah, especially in movement. I don't know if we feel it as much in standing. If it's a severe dysfunction, I can feel it in standing. But once somebody goes into movement, I can just keep my hand on their back and feel the load. The loading isn't correct.
Right, which is exactly what the factory, sorry, the symmetrical saddle, like they said on the website, when it moves, that's showing us how the muscles are working, just like your hands feel, and your hands are very trained. So when you put hands on people, sometimes what feels obvious to you might be incredibly subtle to somebody who's not trained to feel it.
Right.
But with a horse and a saddle, it's not subtle.
It's not. You can
It's not subtle. Like
you can
that's the
see
good
it.
news.
It's like, yep, yeah, you
Yeah,
can see it. But I think people don't know what to do with that information.
exactly.
Yeah, they're
That is,
lost.
well, that's the part of training that I specialize in
Right.
that isn't well known throughout the horse industry is how do we change that twist of the spine? How do we
Right.
gain internal proper alignment of the spine? Because that's what creates not only a more stable alignment from the head to the tails, front to back, but a level back, left to right, where the muscles are developing symmetrically, which
Right.
stabilizes the saddle, right? It's the muscle use that's pulling the saddle left or right. And at least it's obvious.
Right.
So the human answer so far, what's most prevalent in our industry is, like I said, get a grippier girth, get a stickier saddle pad, flock the saddle asymmetrically, or add shims to one side to balance out the saddle so it quits slipping. Tighten the girth like until your horse can't breathe. Or some people will even have the rider like lengthen, say in the case we
This
were talk about, lengthen
mhm.
one stirrup or shorten
Stirrup,
the
the
other.
stirrup thing. The
Hmm.
stirrup thing. I've heard that, and I've heard things like, "Well, I just had the saddle reflocked to fit my horse, and we're still having problems."
Oh yeah, because the custom fit is the worst. Whatever your
Mhm.
horse's current state is in coordination of the spine and back muscle development, a custom fitted saddle or a saddle that's reflocked to your horse's dysfunctional back is going to just lock them in that posture. There's no changing it after that.
Or I imagine
So
make it worse
it
because
could
you're
make it
supporting the
worse.
habit. Yeah. It's like with a human, you're supporting the limp. You're supporting the movement that causes the limp.
Right. So,
Yeah.
like, even there's saddles where, in the case where the saddle keeps slipping back away
Hmm.
from the heart girth and moving too far down the back, that's related to the back muscles shortening and tightening in contraction when the back is pushing down. That's what pulls the saddle backwards. And
Oh,
so,
so they're going into falling, the back's falling down
yeah,
when the
even if we
saddle
can't,
goes back, right? Is that
yeah,
what you're saying?
because
Okay.
when the spine pushes downward, when the horse drops the back, it's also going to make the croup or the hindquarter higher because the pelvis
Okay.
is disengaging. The hind legs, the hindquarters are disengaging, putting the hind legs too far back behind the torso. So
Wow.
the croup gets higher, the back gets lower, and the shoulders and neck tend to push upward. And even if we can't see all of that in an obvious way, the saddle that keeps gravitating backwards tells you your horse's habit is to push the spine down and disengage the hindquarters. That's
Wow.
why it's going backwards. But again, the saddle fitter and the saddle maker solution was to flock the saddle to fit a dropped back. So instead of having flat panels on the bottom of your English saddle,
Oh,
some of the panels look like
they
crescents.
they curve in.
No, they don't curve
They
in,
don't
they
curve
they
in.
curve down.
Down. Down. Okay, now I'm getting it
Down.
from the top. They go like that. Yeah,
Yeah. So
they
it
curve
looks
down.
like,
Okay. Oh, I've seen that.
so if you flip your English
Good.
saddle over and the panels are sort of banana shaped,
Good
like
point. Yeah.
like two big bananas stuck on the back of your saddle,
Yeah, that's
that's
a good way to put it.
yeah, that's a saddle when you flip it the other way is filling in the hole created by the horse's back. So it
And correct me if I'm wrong, that shallow hollowness on the either side of the wethers where it drops, that is not correct function of
no,
the
that's
horse's
part
back.
of a dropped back. Mhm.
Okay, because a lot of people I hear is, oh, all horses look like that. That's the way it's supposed to be. And I'm questioning, going, I don't think so. I don't think so.
I gotta say, even some respected researchers, I have to read this whole thing about this saddle that became popular at a barn I was working at. But they quoted a well-known researcher, and the saddle maker basically says in his literature that over time, if the back is working correctly, the horse, quote unquote, grows a wither or the withers become more prominent.
Wow.
And I just don't see,
I don't see that in my horses. I see the total opposite happening in my horses.
even if we look at it theoretically,
Right.
as muscle develops, they're going to get plumper as you increase circulation, which is going to make the horse appear and measure wider, not
Right.
narrower.
Right.
And when I've had horses with very prominent withers, it's because the back muscles are so tight and so
Mhm.
atrophied that the bony part of the spine becomes more and more prominent. And in restoring a healthy use of the back muscles and lifting the spine, lifting the back, in my experience, has always become wider, rounder, and the withers are less prominent, not more prominent.
I completely agree with you with that. And I have aged horses at um 24 and 22, and they still have a great quote unquote symmetrical top line. So even I don't even know
Absolutely.
if age is a factor, with that, if they're kept in the right training.
Well, I always learned growing up that the space between the last rib and the point of the hip, the tubercocce of the pelvis, that gap between the rib cage and the hindquarter always increases with age.
Whoa.
And I go, mm, nope, it increases because the
Oh,
psoas it weakens, the core muscles are weak. So even
interesting.
Yeah, so even my 30-year-old, as she's aged, that space has not increased as long as I keep her fit. And my horses that I'm rehabbing, even if they start with a big indent between the last rib and the beginning of
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
hindquarter, when it's really indented there and you can fit the whole palm of your hand in that space between the
I can
bones,
visualize that now.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very weak core. That psoas muscle is, and I always get the psoas backwards because it's a deep internal muscle. So when it's not working correctly, it's over tightening. Is that correct? You
Well,
always have to
I can
correct me on
always
that.
apply it. I can only apply it to human use. So in a person that is not using their psoas as a muscle, like we muscles are supposed to contract and let go and contract and let go.
Hmm.
These days, what we're seeing in people with so much sitting is they're starting to use the psoas as a postural muscle. It is not a postural muscle. It is not meant to statically hold. So a person that is using the psoas to statically hold is going to have that low back, a sway back, whatever you want to call it. It's going to
Yeah.
have that sway back. And we don't want to go into the biomechanics of a psoas muscle, but that's one that it is weak because it's the whole system, but the actual psoas is not allowed to contract and let go because the support of the core and the rest of the internal muscles aren't working either.
And that's exactly the same with a horse. So even if our horse doesn't look like it has a dropped back, as that space is increasing between the last
Hmm.
rib and the hindquarter, that tells us the psoas is losing strength and hindquarters are more disengaged than they are
Mm,
engaged, that the back is pushing down more frequently than it's lifting up. And that's
yeah.
where that banana paneled English saddle is meant to stabilize the rider while riding a horse in that posture. And so again, the saddle industry, because people pay the money for saddles, not horses. So a lot of the fixes,
That's a
right?
good quote.
Well, and people buy equipment, not horses,
Oh,
right?
that's true. It must
So
be the saddle.
selling somebody a new saddle or reconfiguring the saddle or getting better stirrups or a better pad or a better girth, those are really reinforced in the horse business because
Hmm.
number one, it sounds like an easy fix. Number two, nobody's really considering, I want to say it again, this whole back saddle fitting thing and the relationship between the use of the horse's back and how stable or unstable the saddle is.
Right.
And so go back to what you read from that website. There were two parts I sort of wanted to talk
Oh,
about. The first part
oh,
was the symmetrical saddle.
right. And then it was in the same read, but it was from the Dark Horse Farm, and the quote is a lack of this basic building block, which was correct muscling and posture of the horse, can lead to the never-ending saddle search.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Yes.
So
And
it's still going back
herein,
to we got to fix the horse and rider. The saddle's just a, plopped on a part of the equation. It's not, doesn't have a voice. It has a voice,
no,
but
and I'm not big on recommending any particular saddle. I go, whatever saddle, if somebody's had a saddle fitter out and we know for sure the saddle isn't causing pain or locking the horse into a
Mm.
dysfunctional use, then any saddle we can afford will do. Any saddle, we can work with any saddle as long as it's not causing pain or locking a horse into a dysfunctional habit. Anything else is fine.
I think those are two big ones.
Yeah, those are the only caveats.
Hmm.
And so if you know the saddle isn't causing pain, but it's not stable, that's when people go saddle shopping endlessly because the saddle just isn't stable, it's not comfortable, and nobody is saying that's the horse's back doing that.
That's the movement in the back. That's why it's not quote unquote stable.
And this is the problem we run into in the horse industry all the time. Riders are trained to ride a theoretically straight horse that's well engaged, lifting the back. So,
What?
so the way we're trained to ride with
Ah,
normal traditional riding instruction assumes the horse is straight, symmetrical, and is well muscled and can lift the back, engage the hindquarters. But most of us are riding horses that don't do that. Most
exactly.
of us are getting on crooked horses that are dropping the back pretty frequently or losing the hindquarter engagement pretty frequently. And so, how do we adjust our riding to cope with that?
Mm.
And what you just said from the saddle fitting website, the first quote that you want a symmetrical
I've,
saddle,
yeah,
a, a s- a s- symmetrical saddle placed on a healthy,
well
well-muscled
muscled top line.
top line. Well,
That's the quote.
do we just not ride until we get that and we're stuck doing groundwork forever? Or how do we get that if we're not
Hmm.
starting with that? And let's say 90% of people's experience is they get a saddle that's symmetrical. It's brand new. It just came. It was well made. And now you're putting it on a back that's either not well muscled, not symmetrical. The horse is in a poor posture habitually. So we have a fitting issue. It's really a training issue for the horse,
I agree. It's not a fitting issue, it's a training issue. Bingo.
right?
Yeah.
And if we can, like when we're riding, sometimes it's the rider, sometimes it's the horse. When it's really bad, it's always a combination of, say, a person who tends to ride heavy on the left with a horse that
Mm,
tends to keep too much weight to the left with a little twist of the spine or a bend to the left. That saddle's going to go constantly off to the left side,
right.
right? That's going to become a big problem. Sometimes we get a left-handed horse doing all that same thing, but the person has a tendency to be strong or keep more weight to the right side, unconsciously, just as a habit.
Right. It's a total subconscious habit.
Right. And that can kind of stabilize things, but the rider overworks on the right and the horse has too much weight and concussion to the left. So that sort of shows up more in a performance issue. My horse doesn't go
Mm.
to the right, or my horse falls in all the
I can't
time,
get the right lead.
or I can't get the left lead.
Yeah, always one or the other, and that's when you know the balance isn't it's just not correct.
Right. So sometimes if we have a left-handed horse with a right-handed rider, we don't think we have a saddle issue at all, but we have more of a performance issue in that the horse is one-sided. So going left or cantering left is easier than going right or cantering right or vice versa. Like each direction is not equal and easy for the horse,
Right.
right? And so we tend to work harder, right? Rather than going, I have a problem related all the way back to the root cause, which is either the rider has a twist and a bend
Hmm.
habitually through the spine, even if they look straight, or the horse has a little twist or a bend through the spine, even though the horse looks straight.
Agreed.
right? So whether we have a one-sided horse or a saddle slipping to one side, it's typically the same root cause,
Mhm.
right? Related to the spinal functions, which is then going to determine how the muscles are used.
Yes.
So asymmetrical muscle development through our horse's back and hindquarters tells us we have a lateral bend or twist rotation as a habit in the movement,
Mm.
as a pattern of coordination through our horse's nervous system. That's what we need to change.
A pattern. That's a good way to put it. Through the central nervous system that needs to change. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
exactly
because
the
everybody thinks it's the cardiovascular work that our horse has to trot, canter, sweat, breathe hard in order to build muscle. And
don't
I
we
go,
think that about us too?
we think that about us too. No pain, no gain. But what really develops muscle and what develops the right tone, like you said, a healthy muscle used for movement has to contract and has to shorten and lengthen, has
Yes,
to,
that all of that has to be available.
and it has to be equally easy to shorten or lengthen. That's what suppleness is in the muscle, the ability to shorten or lengthen and contract or rest,
Yes.
right? So that muscle use and every single way that every single muscle is used in the body is dictated by the coordination of the skeleton. Doesn't matter if it's a walk that's so slow you're in a cloud of turtle dust or galloping on the track and winning the race. The
Right.
speed of movement has nothing to do, very little to do, I
I
should say,
like to hear that.
with muscle development. It's the coordination of the bones during motion. And like we've talked about before, the coordination of the appendicular skeleton, the arms,
Hmm.
legs, and even the use of the horse's head and neck is going to be dictated by the use of the axial skeleton. So even the skeleton has two parts.
This is true.
So in trying to resolve what might look like saddle issues or training issues, we have to trace it back to understanding that there are 5 different functions of the spine, which is the main part of the axial skeleton, and that each one isn't a substantial amount of movement, but it's a critical movement
Mm,
that's going to dictate the coordination of the entire skeleton in motion.
yes.
Right? So if we
Yes.
have a peg-legged moving horse, those stiff little legs that don't want to bend or reach very far tells us that the axial skeleton or the spine itself is unstable. So the legs are taking over the job of stabilizing the body, right? When the legs are bendy and fluid and buoyant, that can only happen when the spine is stabilized within a very limited range of motion.
Yes.
So, and then how the axial skeleton is used determines how the appendicular skeleton is used, and how both are used is actually what creates the muscle use, what dictates
Yeah.
the muscle use, which is then going to turn into muscle development,
Right.
right? And then how
Big
the muscles
stuff.
are used is then going to affect the saddle.
Yep.
So
You
we have to
can't just
go,
look at the legs.
and you can't just get a sticky girth and hope it's going to keep everything in place. I mean, you can,
I just
but
want to ride.
yeah.
Why is this so complicated?
And it is complicated to understand because bodies are complicated, movement
Yes.
is complicated, but it's not hard to do.
No.
like it's not hard to do at all because if our saddle keeps slipping to the left horribly all the time, and every time we come to halt, we have to sort of throw our weight to the right side and shift the saddle back to center. What that tells us is we need to keep more than 50% of our body weight over the right side of the saddle all the time. Then the horse can change. But if
I
our
think that's
weight,
real important that to be able to know when the change is happening, though, because it's not just hang out over there all the time. You've got to check in to see, am I getting somewhere? Is this working?
well, our balance is also about keeping our skeleton as symmetrical as the saddle. So, one of the things I learned to do working on myself was while I'm riding, if I look down at my
Hmm.
own thigh bones, my thigh bones should be symmetrical to each other at all times. If I
Right.
don't realize that I'm getting pulled with the saddle and with my horse's back, then when I look down, I'm going to see one thigh bone is higher or farther forward
Hmm.
or closer to the front of the saddle compared to the other one at any given moment, right?
Right.
So without even our conscious awareness, when our skeleton is being shifted left or right, one leg starts gripping. So,
That's what I was going to say. I think people know I think if you have not had some training in your own balance and communication and coordination, it's very hard to hear that about yourself when you're riding.
yeah, because our brain normalizes it.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
good.
And unless you've had Alexander training or, something where you have integrated a little bit more information about where am I in time and space and what is neutral, you're totally unaware other than you're fatigued or like you wake up the next day and oh my God, the inside of my right thigh is screaming.
Yes,
And we don't attribute that to imbalance. We don't look at that and say, well, why is that?
right.
Why am I there? That shouldn't be.
No, and a takeaway for everybody listening to this podcast is the next time you sit on your horse, especially if your saddle has not been custom fitted, God forbid, and has its factory specs, then when you sit on your saddle, no matter Western English, doesn't matter, long stirrups, short stirrups, doesn't matter, you're going to look down at your own thigh bones over the ground,
Hmm.
not over the horse. And
I think that's another whole, yeah. Over
yeah,
gravity, not the horse.
and if you're crooked, one leg is going to look, one thigh bone is going to be lower or farther back or look longer, and the other one is going to be higher up, closer to you, farther forward. And if you compare the feel of each leg, the longer lower thigh bone will feel, that leg will muscularly feel more relaxed, like it's
Hmm.
hanging. And the leg with the shorter, more forward thigh bone is going to feel slightly tighter if we notice it at all, because we might be used to it, but it's
Right.
going to be working harder compared to the left leg. So all we have to do to start the process of helping our horse correct the imbalance is arrange our center in the saddle to make our thigh bones symmetrical.
Right.
Now that's going to start a helmet fire,
Yeah, it
which,
is.
yeah, because
It usually does.
in order to make our thigh bones symmetrical to each other on a crooked horse with a
On a crooked
neutral,
horse is important.
on a crooked horse with a neutral saddle, symmetrical saddle, that means instead of our seat bones being centered over the gullet of the saddle, we might be straddling the right bar of the saddle or the left bar of the saddle. We might be out of center left to right in order to make our thigh bones symmetrical to each other. We might feel like we have greater than 50% of our internal body weight on the right side or the left side
Mhm.
in order to make our thigh bones symmetrical to each other. And what starts the helmet fire is our brain has normalized our pattern of crookedness on the horse
Mhm.
we ride the most. So
Right.
people say to me all the time, this can't be right. I feel like I'm going to fall off this side or that side. I'm not in the middle of the saddle. I'm not equal in my stirrups. How can this be? And you look down, check your own thigh bones. That's the truth about where our body is over gravity.
Mhm.
The rest of it is a crooked saddle or a crooked horse, the
Right.
saddle being pulled by the crooked horse. And so, what we can do is use our weight and our mass. When our thigh bones look symmetrical, our body weight might not feel symmetrical. And that's
Right.
what throws everybody into a tizzy because it doesn't
Yes.
feel balanced. But I go,
Right.
that's how you have to ride a crooked horse or
Yeah,
a horse.
I get that all the time in Alexander lessons, even off the horse, is when I help the person find neutral, because most people lean too far back.
Or too far forward.
Right. So when I say, here's neutral, that, they're all their communication from their brain to their body is the helmet fire. It's
Yeah.
just like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait.
Yeah. No, and I know you do like I do. I started carrying my phone a lot more often in lessons so that that's the
Yes.
moment I'm going to take a picture.
The pictures help a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you can get pictures, if you can have people take pictures of you on your horse and on the ground, you might learn a lot from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and we're just talking left to right, but
Yeah.
that seems to really fry people's brains even more than the
Hmm.
front to back. But
Yeah.
that's basically what we're doing. And so it's a great self-check just to look down at our own thigh bones. And when I first started doing this, it was like a couple of rides every few strides. I had
It
to
changes.
readjust my
Yep.
body because I just hadn't been aware before. So, like, every 2 minutes, I'm looking down at my thigh bones and then I have to adjust again. And then I look down 2 minutes later and oh crap, I'm back, crooked
I'm back
again.
there.
I'm back
Yeah.
there again.
I say to myself is, are all my joints open and available? Because if they're not, I'm tensing somewhere to stay on. So
Right.
then I rethink, okay, why am I tensing?
Where
You
am I
need,
tensing?
where am I tensing and what do I need to change?
Yeah, because the use of the horse's back that is pulling the saddle left, right, or backwards is also pulling our body the same direction.
Exactly.
That force is going through the saddle right into our bodies as riders. So, like when we talk about, even if we can't see it, when the horse is dropping the back, disengaging the hindquarters, and the saddle is gravitating farther and farther back, most riders who are coping with that problem with their horse are also going to find most of their body weight is in their seat,
Yep.
that they tend to either stiffen the shoulders as a kind of counterbalance and their body weight is too high, or if they've lowered their body weight and center of mass, then the weight tends to be a lot more in the seat compared to the legs,
Right.
right? And on horses like that, when we finally sort of get our body weight equalized between our seat and our thigh bones, and we're equal left to right, symmetrical, we can. I've been on horses whose back was so dropped, I felt like I was riding in 2 point, like I was really leaning
Oh,
forward.
I get the tipped pelvis. The rotation of the pelvis happens a lot
Mhm.
too. When it feels like I'm being pulled down into a bowl
You are.
constantly. It's like this
That's
constant pressure of, oh my gosh, how do I stay out of the well?
exactly. Exactly. No, and that is the direction of force that's being generated by the horse's use of the spine and the back muscles. So it's not only pulling the saddle back and down, it's pulling our bodies back and down. So
Yeah.
again, if we go with it, then our weight and mass just sort of makes the problem worse. If we counteract it with our weight and mass, that's the simplest way to talk about correcting the horse's balance. We have to use our body to counteract the problem, right?
Yes.
So all those years we've been told to move with the horse, and that
Mm,
it's like, even when you say, are my joints open and available, that can maybe make some people think they need to be very mobile, right? That they need to be loosey-goosey and move with the
mm,
horse. And I go,
not
it
so
sort of
much.
depends,
Yeah.
because
It's
are we
not
moving
that.
are we
Yeah.
moving with the horse into a dysfunction,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Or are we counterbalancing, counteracting that dysfunction, giving our horse the space to correct it, right?
Yeah.
So when we get our weight out of the way of either the hole or being pulled down on the left, suddenly the horse has the space to fill that up,
Yeah.
has the room to make the change, because we're not locking the horse into the pattern with our extra weight and mass on
Right.
top of the saddle going there.
And then usually comes a level of tension
Oh
to
yeah,
stay
we're going
there.
to struggle.
And it goes back, I think I mentioned it podcasts ago, that once we tense a muscle, it shuts down all the proprioceptors to get information from the brain to that muscle. So we become unaware of the tightening and stiffening.
Absolutely, it just becomes normalized.
Yeah, and that's the point of my work, is to can you make everything accessible and be adaptable, kind of like what we want the horses to be, adaptable and accessible, but you have to have correct spinal function for that to happen.
Well, and the only way I've ever found to help very tight riders or very tight horses, including myself as a very tight rider at one time, was arranging my skeleton and body weight to remain stable and resist these forces of, say, being pulled back and down or pulled to the left. If I think in terms of arranging my skeleton and my body weight first, it really helps me not overuse the muscles. I still
Great
might
point.
work hard muscularly, but if
Right.
I have the bulk of my body and body weight in the right place, I'm going to work a lot less muscularly, which leaves the sensory perception open to
Yes.
feel the changes in my horse's use or the movement of the saddle or where the saddle wants to go. And then I can resist that. But if I'm trying to hold a perfect position,
Heels down,
right?
thumbs up.
Or remain vertical even. It's like if I'm feeling my way through a horse that's out of balance, I might feel like I'm too far forward or too far to the right.
Hmm.
But I look down at my thigh bones and I'm symmetrical left to right. Or I feel my internal body weight top to bottom and it's in my lower half and it's sort of equal between my seat and legs. Then I know I'm in a vertical place, even though I feel like I'm leaning too far forward,
Right.
right?
Right.
And if I look at pictures or video of myself, I go, wow, that isn't at all what it felt like.
Felt like, yeah,
Because on
exactly.
every different horse and every different saddle, we're having to adapt, or I'm having to adapt exactly the use of my skeleton and my body weight and keep adjusting that body weight during motion. So it's a dynamic. I think that's where that idea of move with the horse might have come from, is that I'm constantly adapting during motion, but I'm not really moving with the horse, I'm actually moving against the forces that want to
Hmm.
make me unstable or unbalanced.
To make disrupt neutral. That's what I say it is. I'm trying to maintain neutral and keep my center of mass, which is like right below my belly button, over my feet and left to right.
Front,
So
back, left, right.
yeah, it's not a place. That I think that's important to say. It's not, oh, I found it and I'll just stay here.
Right. Or
It's
that I'll hold the perfect.
hold it. I'll hold it and it'll be okay.
Yeah.
It's not that either. It's
No,
this
because,
dynamic relationship of availability and tone to
yeah.
stay neutral.
And I'll say a lot of times it feels like getting your sea legs on a boat.
Oh, I totally agree. Yes.
That's what good riding mostly feels like. So if you went with the wave, bye bye, overboard you
Out in the
go.
ocean. Bye.
Right? So we counteract the force of the waves when we get our sea legs in order to maintain exactly what you said. Our center of mass has to be over the center of our feet. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter if we straighten our joints, bend our joints, feel like we're leaning forward, feel like we're
Exactly.
leaning back, shifting more body weight right or left. We're constantly having to adjust our internal body weight and our skeletal use in order to just remain upright on a boat in
Yep.
the ocean.
Hmm.
And that's what we're doing in the saddle.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny, like a new rider will do the same thing as someone first time on the ocean on a boat, like try to grab the rail,
The
right?
rains.
Stiffen every muscle, which only
Yep.
makes you less stable,
God
or
bless
get
horses.
or get really loosey-goosey, and suddenly you're kind of out of sync with the actual motion, so you get pitched around anyways or lose your
Yep, you're
balance.
catching up.
Yeah. So it's when
Oh,
people ask me about what does good riding feel like, I go, not so different than getting your sea legs. It's very
yep.
similar. And how we find that static stability over a moving force, which is the back and the saddle, means constant adaptation and adjustment internally. We feel it, but nobody can see us do it.
Exactly. It's a lot of internal movements going on to maintain neutral.
Yeah. You're
Yeah,
moving in order to not move.
exactly.
Crazy.
I love
What's
that.
that craziness?
What's that geeky thing?
Yeah. And so if we take our factory made saddle and put it on a horse that's not moving well, then not only are we stabilizing our body, but we're stabilizing the saddle to where it's meant to be, right? Again, by how we ride, that's what keeps the saddle in place, right? You don't have to
Bingo.
constantly make the girth so tight that your horse can't breathe. And you don't need an endless stream of sticky pads or different saddles or shims or blah, blah, blah. Although everybody wants to sell those to you. So,
Oh boy.
so take what you have and play with your body weight, your skeletal alignment, look down at your thighs, feel where your body weight is depending on how your horse is moving, and you'll start to find that your saddle is not as bad as you think.
Have fun with that.
I know.
We do
It's a
that all the
good
time, don't
good
we?
takeaway on this podcast. So I love the title of this podcast, this whole back saddle fitting thing.
What is that?
Yes. Yeah. So
All
just
right.
quit buying stuff for a month and work with
Quit
what you
buying stuff.
have.
Your, your significant other will be so happy.
Well, your horse will be a lot happier too, because
That's true.
just being able to not fall off doesn't mean that your horse isn't struggling more and more and more. Just because you got stable and you
Mhm.
got the saddle to not slip doesn't mean your horse feels any better at all just yet.
Truth. That's the truth.
So, So yeah, like you said, your husband will thank you, your horse will thank you, and you'll be able to quit saddle shopping for a while and quit
Yep.
equipment shopping for a while. So Merry Christmas, right?
Yeah.
All right, you guys, thanks for joining us. Any final words, Deb?
Nope. I think that was a fun one.
That was a fun one. All right, you guys, thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Horse Geeks podcast.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.